Да, внизу на минус Да, да. Так, ладно. Ну что? Нет, здесь. Ну, давайте мы начнем так, а потом Уважаемые коллеги, можем начинать.
Distinguished colleagues, we may start now.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues, dear friends, experts, controllers, auditors, inspectors. It is the third time that we meet here at this platform. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on the upcoming Professional Day of Financier. And it's become a good tradition to celebrate this holiday here at the platform at the venue of Moscow Financial Forum. Our today's topic, financial control and audit as basis for improving the quality of public finance management. This topic is not random because previously, during our first panel discussion, we discussed such key issues related to the transition of control system, organization of preliminary control, prevention, and we made decision that was already implemented on the establishment of consulting body, the Council on Development of State Financial Control and Audit, and this body has been very active recently. Members of this council and its co-chair today are present here at our panel discussion. Before we start our discussion, I'd like to give the floor to the ideologist of our budgetary system, Deputy Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation, Alexei Lavrov. Distinguished colleagues, Mr. Danchikov, Monday, 10th of September, State Duma Committee on Budget and Taxation is going to consider amendments to Budgetary Code of the Russian Federation on municipal control. This is a part of new edition of our Budgetary Code that we've been considering proactively, and we do hope that this year we manage to adopt those amendments, and everything that you're going to discuss today can be and must be implemented. I congratulate you all on this new edition of Budgetary Code of the Russian Federation and on the beginning of the consideration of those amendments. Now I'd like to grant the certificates of Moscow Financial Forum in the nomination development of legal regulation system of financial state control goes to Director of Moscow Supervision Office, Mr. Yevgeny Danchikov.
Диплом.
The certificate of Moscow Financial Forum in the category Efficient Organization of Internal State Financial Management in the region goes to Chair of the Committee on State Financial Control of St. Petersburg, Mr. Alexander Zhukov.
Диплом Москвы.
Certificate of Moscow Financial Forum in the category Young Experts goes to Chief Specialist of Taxation Policy Division of Vologda region goes to Ms. Yulia Malkova.
Успехов. Диплом.
Certificate in the category Young Professionals goes to Chief Specialist of Budgetary Division of Committee on Financial Taxation of the city of Barnaul, Tatiana Novokakshonova.
Уважаемые коллеги,
Distinguished colleagues, I regret that I will not be able to take part in your discussion. I'd like to wish every success to you, new results, new achievements in your difficult but very demanded work.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such a pleasant beginning to our discussion. Now I'd like to introduce myself. I will be moderating our discussion. My name is Evgeny Danchikov, Director of Moscow's Supervision Office. I believe this prize is a prepayment for my work here today. Let us get started. I'd like to start by saying that all our platforms discuss the role, the goal, the place of financial control, and we all believe that the major role of state financial control is not to restrict, is not to be a policeman, not to punish. This role is to foster positive development of regional economy. Its role is to have a positive impact on economic development of the country. The topic that we are going to discuss today is multifaceted. I believe we'll have to answer the following questions. What is your vision of financial control tomorrow? How to proceed from police function to preventive control? What is the place of financial control in assessment of financial management? How to guarantee efficiency of cooperation between external and external inspectors? I guess that all of these questions will be covered by our today's speakers, and during our discussion we'll try to tackle some urgent and most important issues. Our members are Eli Isaev, Deputy Director, Federal Treasury of the Russian Federation; Sergei Romanov, Director of Department of Budgetary Methodology and Financial Accountability in the Public Sector of the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation; Tatiana Blinova, Accountant Expert of Russia's Audit Chamber; Gulnaz Kadyrova, Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry of the Russian Federation; and Alexander Zhukov, Chair of the Committee on State Financial Control of the City of St. Petersburg. Distinguished colleagues, I hope that you will mind the time frame of 10 minutes, because we have only 90 minutes for our discussion, and we have already spent some time. That is why I'd like to ask you to be brief and to take no longer than 10 minutes to pronounce your speeches, so that later on we have an opportunity to ask questions, and probably our audience would like to produce some comments. As of today, the system of financial control is well established in Russia. We have defined the legislative notions, distributed the authorities between the different levels of financial control. At the legislative level, we have defined the subjects of financial control and established financial environment. However, our experience shows that there is a number of problems that we face and that prevent us from building an efficient control environment. This might be related to a majority of control forms, problems, and qualification of violations. It might be related to double nature of some authorities and lack of coordination between controllers of different levels. As of today, Federal Treasury of the Russian Federation, together with expert community, together with Audit Chamber of the Russian Federation and federal entities of the Russian Federation, carries out methodological work on considering the issues and the problems that we have today in the area of building efficient work of control environment. And I have a question to Mr. Isaev. What is your vision of control environment on the whole, and what are the weakest points in the control system? How do you think they can be cured? What recommendations, what tools do we need in order to do so? And what does the Federal Treasury do in order to mitigate risks in its system? And how is the risk-oriented approach in control activity implemented? Thank you so much, Mr. Danchikov. Could you please speak into the mic? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. I believe that this hall has gathered today the control environment, and I'd like to congratulate you, Mr. Danchikov, on receiving the certificate. I'd like to thank you for close cooperation in terms of improving state control, in terms of methodology of state control. Efficient financial control is the basis for improving the quality of state finance management. I'll try to tell you about the problematic issues of financial control and about a single model that we envision in the area of state control. In 2016, when Rosfinnadzor was abolished, the President set a number of tasks to preserve the personnel of Rosfinnadzor and to secure the lasting character of financial control. And as of today, thanks to rational management and thanks to our efforts to preserve our personnel, our staff, we managed to meet this goal. And all in all, in the system of the Russian Treasury, there is such a financial body as Rosfinnadzor. As for control and analytical functions, the Treasury has defined a number of problematic issues. Double character of authorities to control financial state finance in areas of accountant control and in other areas. Here we see that there are many authorities, many bodies that have nearly same functions. It means that we spend a lot of resource on control, that we lack unified methodology. When you start operating in a new format, when you are operator of many systems, you understand that you have to improve something, that the government of the country sets new goals for us. It's not control for the sake of punishment, it's control for the sake of prevention, for the sake of improvement. But if a robbery has already happened, what can control do? How can it get the money back to federal original budget? This question remains. And when in 2012 we turned to Rosfinnadzor in terms of control, I told him that what the budgetary code says is absolutely satisfactory for me as for a controller. But when this control was transformed in the Federal Treasury and I started to use the resources that I had, I got to understand that we should take an absolutely different approach here. I believe that there is a solution to this problem: creation of a unified single model for financial control applicable throughout all governmental levels of Russian Federation. I believe in control events that are carried out thanks to informational control and mutual recognition of results. Shift of focus to prevent violations. Mr. Danchikov, probably you should have rearranged speakers here in order for us to fit this triangle model, because all stages of it are represented here. Madam Blinova is above, and the rest of us are under her. On the picture, you see the prospective model of state financial control. We do not take into account sanctioning, treasury accompanying, or budgetary monitoring. This model takes into account all the levels of external and internal control and interaction between them in terms of risks, informational exchange to the right and to the left, and mutual recognition of the results of control. Now, control bodies do not build a unified vertical structure. They act separately from each other, even though the areas that they control are sometimes the same. So when we move from up to down along this triangle, we see that the major burden comes for the lowest level. Through the internal control, we go to internal audit, to budgetary control, to accountants control. And what was yesterday covered in a speech by Alexei Leonidovich, this external burden, not only in terms of entrepreneurs and of businessmen, is unacceptable. Apart from that, he pointed out that we need other ways to solve this issue and not to control each and every project that we have. In order to carry out efficient financial control, the control bodies have to communicate to each other. Audit chamber can find out risks and report them to Federal Treasury. Federal Treasury discovers additional risks and reports them further on, and it will make it possible to reduce the control burden, to automate the activity on risk control, and to facilitate the feedback from our clients. I believe as of today this is the most important goal that we have to set. In terms of cooperation between control bodies, we have to correlate our plans for control activities. Even at the federal level, these processes are very sophisticated and complicated. Yesterday I managed to meet with Alexei Leonidovich, and soon we are going to meet again. I believe we will discuss checks, audits and controls of Federal Treasury and of Audit Chamber, and together we will establish those control events. And I was promised that we will have another meeting and another frank discussion as to how to correlate our control activities. Now we exchange information on control activities, and thanks to the Audit Chamber of the Russian Federation, there is such an exchange via a specialized platform, via a portal. Federal Treasury, in an automatic mode, posts information at this portal. Well, naturally, this information is not presented there in full, but this year we are going to finalize our work on that, and we'll certainly post all our control materials at this portal. As we see, Treasury cooperates with the bodies of internal financial control when it analyzes their coming up with their authorities and prepares recommendations as to how to improve their operation. However, this cooperation has been unilateral, and we've been talking about it. We said that it is necessary next year during our big council to consider the results of this analysis and to talk about ways possibly to establish feedback and how often should it happen. As a matter of fact, we have established capacity to increase the efficiency of control and to recognize the control results by various bodies. It will help us to reduce our expenditures for control activities and to improve the quality of control. Our prospective task is to increase the participation of control bodies in control activities in the framework of internal control and audit. It is increased control and unification of our approaches to it for members of budgetary process, as well as establishment of major principles and forms of control. I have pointed out the area that you managed to see at the previous slide, and it was the most important one. And let's have a look at another picture. Yesterday at our Council on Internal Control, we considered it. It is about risk-oriented approaches to state financial control.
I've already mentioned that this is not our goal today to discover violations. Of course, we need to do that, and the punishment should be present there after the discovery of violations. But our main goal today is to prevent these violations, and in order to do it, we need to learn to manage the risks in order not to allow these violations to happen. And this is something that the Treasury has been doing for some time. And the question was asked, what needs to be done? We are conducting this work in the Federal Treasury. We are open to our controlled subjects. We're not only informing them about the results of our control, our activity, about the measures that we are adopting or have already adopted. We have an open dialogue through the control commissions with the participation of the subjects of our control, and we analyze every violation. This is one. Second, we send the results of it to the addresses to the main stakeholders in the allocation of the budget. We disseminate this information about the violations, what happened, so that they can adjust or redress what they have done. So what I'm asking here, we have a lot of chief audit officers, chief financial officers here, and some chiefs of the government agencies, Minprat, for instance. Can you please share with us your thoughts about the usefulness of the practice that we have been implementing as far as, for instance, the exclusion, prevention, or the detection of these violations is concerned? And dear colleagues, of course, I want to say that the Treasury has been doing a lot of work to develop the indices to show the progress and achievements of the subjects of our control. We have the working group. I'm the head of this working group. We have developed about 1,500 of these indices, and we are going to have some rating system for the subjects of our control, high, medium, and low. And of course, whenever the rating is low, they're going to be potential subjects of our control. So this model that we are developing now, that we were talking about for a long time yesterday, Sorry, I think I have exceeded my time and I want to wrap it up here. If you have questions, we can discuss it later. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Ellie, Mr. Isaev, for your exhaustive presentation and for making the time. Of course, the rating system should be not only the punishment of those who are at the bottom of this rating, but also some prizes or incentive for those who are at the top. You showed the wonderful pyramid, and the top of this pyramid is traditionally, the top of the pyramid is the audit chamber of the Russian Federation. So, Tatiana Viktorova, my question is for you. In your opinion, what do you think? Do we have any problems? What problems do we have in control as far as the opinion of the audit chamber is concerned? And what do you think should be the mechanisms, considering all the proposals that we've heard from Ellie, in order to have a really good structural interaction between all the levels of control and the external and internal? Thank you very much. Good morning, dear colleagues. First of all, I think that before starting answering these questions, I think it would be in order to characterize the system that we already have in place. I'm talking about the internal audit, financial audit, and also the tools that are used by the Federal Treasury and the Audit Chamber. First of all, I would like to dwell on the bottom of the pyramid, which is the most significant, and this is closer to the process which is associated with violations and risks that we all know in the overall, and our overall system of audit and control tries to drive these risks to a minimum or to zero. Of course, I'm going to talk about the internal audit system primarily and how we see this system and how we should use the system. In this regard, I would say that there are a few data characterizing this system. As of today, we have the internal audit system, which exists in 96% of the main administrators of the budget funds. And it shows that we do have the system in place, and it is operating. Then, how is it operating? On the one hand, of course, we have some positive examples that can be easily stated as, for instance, we have already reduced the number of falsified reports, annual reports twice, and also the scope of all the violations in financial control and audit have been reduced as compared to 2016. These are all the numbers characterizing the system. At the same time, in some gaps, we have the structural departments or the persons who are authorized to conduct the internal audit. They're less than 50%. And in fact, there are no people like that. The internal audit is thriving, but these people do not exist. And the functions and the authority that should be vested in these employees is not present. Some of these employees do not have the proper qualifications. as in compliance with the government executive order 193. How can we speak about the quality? Because speaking about the numbers is not enough. Let's talk about the quality. That executive order 193 is about confirming the reliability of the internal audit and formulation of the proposals that will allow us to efficiently optimize the spending of the resources that all the gaps have. What is the system in full compliance with these requirements? Unfortunately, out of 95 gaps which take part in the system, only 13 reports contain the mention of the reliability of their own system. They consider that their systems are reliable, and this is the lowest level of self-assessment. This is the self-assessment by the stakeholders themselves. That's why, from my point of view, this is a very important factor. And we're not only talking about whether we realize it or not, but this realization about the system is that the system is ready to take challenges, and the system can confirm the reliability of internal audits, some spendings which are not targeted, and the trustworthiness of the financial reports. And another quality indicator here, and again it's in the Executive Order 193, there are some proposals that should be formulated within the system aimed at the optimization of the budget spending, and there are only very few of those bodies which formulated such proposals during the internal audits. So we believe that the system should operate more efficiently and should address the tasks that are set before this system. Of course, we have certain potential. Of course, we have certain resources as far as the development of the system and the need to develop this system is concerned. And from the point of view of awareness where we are and how we need to develop. If we are talking about the Federal Treasury, then of course it goes without saying that they have a huge potential. You remember we discussed it yesterday in much detail during our panel discussion as far as the centralizing of the accounting is concerned. The Treasury should accept some of the functions of the internal, related to internal audits, and we hope that in the future they're going to formulate a system of proposals to optimize and enhance the efficiency of the system, not only for further operational control, but for preventive control that can be implemented in this case. And of course, it goes without saying that the highest organ, the highest body here is the audit chamber. In the present environment, and Mr. Kudrin has mentioned many times that the audit chamber should aim at strategic audit conduct. And they need to make sure that the goals, objectives and goals of the audit is in compliance with the objective and goals of the public and the public society. And of course, we need to discuss a lot of issues inside the auditors community, and also we need to discuss the distribution and functions and roles. And I think that there are certain goals that we need to resolve, achieve. In this slide, we saw that every level of the government control, government audit, should be accompanied by a certain map of risks, certain risk parameters that we need to orient at, both the allocators and the receivers of the budget funds. But we all need to understand that this system, what I mean is the system of risk orientation should be more comprehensive. We used to say that it is our unity. So if we provide a certain set of tools for the people at every stage of the financial control and audit, so that these people would be able to detect the violations, that would be good. But it is very important also to learn to understand and comprehend these risks. If we look at the maps at each of the gaps, it means that we do not see the situation. We're not fully aware of the situation, and we are not transforming these results into the documents for our further activities, both for the Treasury and for the Audit Chamber. And I'm talking about the discovered violations and faults. I don't want to say that we are talking about the same violations and forms which were discovered by other allocators of public funds. We sort of are not trying on a dinner jacket. We are not positioning ourselves in this system. I think that we all face the same risk, a huge risk that we need to overcome in the system. So the visibility of the lack of faults in an organization, it's really very dangerous, because in this case it means that we don't have the necessary tools to discover them and to enhance the efficiency of spendings and to achieve our goals of public development. There is a potential, a certain potential there. Let's all together try to use it. Thank you very much. Tatiana, can I ask you a question? How can we build the mechanism, and what is your opinion about those proposals about the exchange of information between the control audits and the mutual acceptance of the audits by each of the organization? Of course, but I don't want to say that only the agencies need to share the results. These results should be accessible and public. That's why we have set up this resource, the resource which is administered by the Audit Chamber, and it is accessible for everyone. We need to be transparent and open with our information resources, and then you can learn from the errors of others. They should be positioned as the facts from the economic life and the errors that may occur with every allocator of funds, every spending unit. So all these data, which can be received not only from the Federal Treasury or the auditors in the constituent subjects of the Russian Federation, but also by the internal financial control, financial audit. They all should be incorporated into this system, because it's only the array of these data, the aggregation of these data, that can give us the adjusted approach to the risk situations. Thank you very much, Tatiana. In your presentation, you touched upon a very important topic. This is the functioning of the operation of the internal financial control and audit. You identified the problems like the staffing is not full, the authority is not vested in full, then the qualification is low, the self-assessment of their activity is also very low. And I would also like to identify another problems, and that is something we come across very often. It's a very vague understanding of their functions, what they need to do. In fact, these are the problems which are interfering with the functioning of the internal financial control and audit. And Sergey, this is a question for you. What do you think? What are the difficulties in this system? And what do we need to do in order to resolve these problems? Because the key problem, is it organization, or is it, for instance, the significant content or insight or something? Hello, dear colleagues. I'm ready to answer your questions, but I would like to speak about the pyramid that we started discussing today. When we're talking about the system, when we're talking about the state internal financial control, then like any system in the world, it should be built primarily on the sufficiency and exclusion of duplicating duties. It's only in the aircraft that the duplication is conducive to safety, but even during the flight, these functions do not work simultaneously. One function operates, and if it fails, then the duplicating function works, not simultaneously. And unfortunately, a lot of functions and authorities, they are not identified very clearly, and very often they do some simultaneous work.
The current duties and authorities, when we talk about our goal, our task, not to criticize the wording, but when we perceive our task as to detect violations, but rather to prevent violations, well, I agree, this is true, but still the function of a control body is to control, which means to detect violations. Yes, we have to do so, taking into account technological and functional capacities and opportunities, and a control body can direct part of its activity to prevent violations, it's true, but simultaneously, the procedure to prevent violations is composed of different functions. This is not a new topic for us. It does not mean that previously we never prevented violations. We have always done so. We have always tried to prevent violations. We had specialized personnel to do so. We had specialized system to facilitate it, the system of internal audit and control. This is what helps to prevent violations, because the major goal of internal audit is to prevent rather than to control and detect. The system was created later on, when the control body was already in place and operating. And what we do now is that now we try to make those two systems fulfill one and the same function. We cover our control body with a blanket, then with another one, then with a third one, and finally our control body is suffocating under all those layers of blankets. Because even the best control system, at some point, it starts to interfere with the control subject, and it stops to help. On the contrary, it impedes the processes that go on. And when I received a question about internal control and internal audit, the biggest mistake that we make is the lack in this system of internal control and internal audit This system has certain flaws, and, well, it is normal, it works with them, and those flaws later on are corrected. But sometimes there is a flaw when the control body entirely substitutes its goals and its tasks. When we thought about what is internal control, there was an old topic that the best controller is the conscience of the passenger. Probably not now, and in Moscow buses, not all the doors open simultaneously at all the stops, but previously it was the case. So the best controller was the conscience of passengers. Yes, I believe that the best controller is conscience of an officer that carries out control, and apart from that, this officer, this man, controls himself as well. But we here represent control environment, and we have to make sure that this conscience is not asleep. For that sake, we have various tools, for example, control map, the register of results, mechanisms to submit proposals. But still, it used to be conscience that worked, and it remains conscience that works. Our financial control does not envision any specialized financial management. We only believe that inner audit carries out the supervision of the system and later on submits its assessment. Internal control is a tool itself. For personnel, it's a tool to control their activity. For an external audit, it is a tool to understand the essence of the system and the efficiency of it. Internal auditors have their own specific functions, but this is not the goal they set for themselves. It is not a goal, it is only a tool that makes it possible to create a certain database in order to carry out their functions, to analyze, to produce proposals, to increase efficiency, to increase quality of service. This is what we need our control mechanisms for. Instead of it, what do we see? We see our old and well-known control division. We hear the demands to receive people, to receive money, because companies need internal control department. However, they are in place already. We have Federal Treasury, we have control bodies of federal units of the Russian Federation, we have Audit Chamber of the Russian Federation, we have multiple authorities, multiple bodies that carry out this control. And what their subjects have to do is to develop their internal, inner conscience. And then we will build on the progress of each other and not to duplicate our functions. We also have a system of founders' control. It is still in place, but it is not regulated because it is not a budgetary authority. Founders' control is administrative activity of a founder as to what he has founded. A sort of mother's instincts or father's instincts, probably. This is internal control of the founder, is financial control as well. This activity should control all the aspects of activities, including finance. This tool has always been in place, and authorities still have it. No one prevents them from building their own system of financial control, from attracting external controls, external auditors if they need them, if they want to establish a specific, specialized mechanism of financial control. But what we urge them to do is not to substitute functions, because when these bodies create control mechanisms, they forget about audit, they forget about internal control, everything stops there. because there will be no people, no proposals, because the only proposal of an internal auditor is the list of violations. And those internal auditors will not give a single proposal as to how to correct those violations. These problems that I'm talking about now do not require any sort of regulatory assistance, because our legislation does not prevent us from doing what I'm talking about now. Nobody says that you have to establish internal control instead of external auditor. I agree with Madam Blinova that there is a resource and you can use it. Go, come in, look at it, analyze. I always say to my auditors, why are your proposals so scarce, so few? They tell me, well, we had 3 comments, 3 remarks, we thought about them, and that's what we have. My question to them is, why not take same action relating to Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Healthcare, have a look at what they have, analyze it, establish certain logics, hierarchy of violations, and think about risks, and then think about prevention. Nothing prevents us from doing it. Nothing prevents us from recognizing the results of mutual work of control bodies and authorities. What do we wait for? Do we wait that our budgetary code says that and here I'd like to point out that as soon as we start regulating this issue will get even more complicated than it is now. There was a presidential recommendation on budgetary regulation of citizens, and this recommendation lived for a long time, and now we had specific negotiations and discussions related to it. We were tasked to present a bill, and now we have done so. But we have received a remark that if we take the action that we have enshrined in this bill, the budgetary provision will stop, because this legislative act will no longer help. It will restrict and stop the activities whatsoever. I understand the system and this pyramid too well. And what I also understand that we have to work all together on the normative regulation of those issues. But I believe that the efficiency of state control, its influencing and affecting the results of activities and increasing efficiency, it is all dependent on the participants of those procedures, on how efficient are they in performing their duties, on how they understand their duties and their tasks. I believe that it is where element of discussion comes in. Well, not really. I wanted to support you and to say the following. What you're talking about is the issue of trust and confidence. Trust on part of internal financial audit to internal financial control. This is trust and confidence. It is about whether we trust what our colleagues have done. Same for internal state control and audit. It is about trust to the system of internal financial control and audit. But does this system comply with those trust requirements? This is the question that we have to ask. Probably for us, the principle of trust and confidence is really important, but the easiest way to build up a system of mutual trust is to pronounce certain criteria that are characteristic for trusts. And one of the simplest ways to do so is to produce strict standards for these activities. standards for both external and internal control environment. And as soon as we have such a system of standardization, we have an opportunity to control whether our partners are compliant with those standards. If they are, we can trust them. If they are not compliant with the standards, then we cannot trust them. So it is not about standards of trust, it is about standards of activities that help us understand whether to trust or not. And this is what we deal with now. So I have a comment. I'd like to thank all the participants of our discussion. I believe that I'm in the same environment I used to be in 7 years ago when I said that we shouldn't change anything and that the system we had was satisfactory for everybody. That was for one thing. For another thing, I'd like to congratulate all my colleagues on the upcoming 95th anniversary of our authority. I believe we are going to celebrate this. And what I want to say is that over the recent years, nothing changed. The approaches, the methods remain pretty same. And I believe you are correct in saying that nothing prevents us from doing what we should do. We all understand that duplicated functions are in place, and we establish when we create a normative act or a decree, and when we say that control for the usage of state money is carried out by this body, by this body, by this body, at this point our bodies already understand which one is responsible for that. I believe that when we have certain resources, we do not be idle. Madam Balinova, if you publish the results of the activity of the audit chamber, you'll see that the dynamics does not improve, it is getting worse. Over 2017, we turned back 34 billion rubles to federal budget. We detected multiple violations. 8 billion rubles were detected as incorrect usage of budgetary money. So this is what gives us impetus for work. Let us work, let us do so. These are our approaches. Okay, here we may talk what we like, what we want to, but what's the situation in the regions? It's absolutely different there. And that's why our president pointed his attention at that. Why do you have to go to those remote regions if we have established an overall control and presented results to the higher segments of our government? We do recognize the results of our control. Why do I have to go and check somewhat that has already been checked by my colleagues? We can just exchange our plans and then trust is in place. It's the same as internal control and internal audit. It's like founders control and accountants control. Somebody will say that they have different duties and different authorities, whereas they're performing one and the same function. The problems are in place. We cannot say that they're non-existent. We have got together here to discuss those issues, and probably we have to develop a specific approach, and Ministry of Finance, as a regulator to this activity, has to help us. And yes, it was proven that the Ministry of Finance will do so. Yes, this was already said. It was registered. I do not refuse to deal with it, but the question is, what is the problem, what is its consequence? Well, we'll continue this discussion in any case. I have a question for Madam Kadyrova, what are the difficulties that you face when organizing internal financial control and audit? We know that the Ministry of Trade and Industry is one of the most efficient bodies of executive authority that allocates a significant part of budgetary funds and that builds an efficient system of protection of this money and of its efficient usage. We've touched upon a topic that apart from internal financial control and audit, we have founders control, we have control over the usage of subsidies, we have accountants control, we have municipal control, we have purchasing control. How do you cope with all those forms of control, and how do you build your system on the basis of it? Do you use the information provided by your colleagues, by Federal Treasury, by the Audit Chamber in your operation? Thank you for giving this assessment of our activities. My colleagues are now watching this discussion live, so I'd like to congratulate my colleagues now on such high assessment of our operation. Could you please show us this triangle, this pyramid? Thank you. If you have a look at this pyramid as an architectural construction, any constructor knows that the sustainability of a system is assured by fundaments. That is why I'm at least scared at the level of responsibility that me and Alexander have, that we share, and our responsibility for the sustainability of the system. However, we recognize this responsibility, and speaking about the tasks that we have, this is financial control and audit that are the basis for increasing the quality of financial management. What do the managers want from us? They want us to assess the risks, the existing risks, the potential risks that might influence or affect the result of their management. What is the task of Ministry of Industry and Trade? It is to develop industry. What are the tasks of industry? They are outlined in a presidential decree in our national goals and our national projects and state programs of the Russian Federation.
What is expected of us by our colleagues? Since we are the platform and the basis of stability of this pyramid, if you look at the Article 160, so what are our duties? Control over the compliance with the law regulating the budget, legal relations, the spending articles, the budget reporting and accounting, preparation of the measures to enhance the efficiency and bring up results, and all the legislative relations that occur during the budget implementation. So from the 0 point, from the time when the decision is made about allocation up to the final result, this is the process that we control. And we do not only control the results after the finish of the financial procedures, but we can also make our assessment some time after the end of the process. The contract states that the contract expires only when all the obligations of the parties have been fulfilled, and the obligation here is when the results that are prescribed in the agreement have been achieved. If you look at the new budget code, we have external and internal control, and the basis of the pyramid is the audit chamber, and that's the external audit, and we carry out the internal audit as per the regulations. and we receive the documents from the Treasury, and this is also in the matter of trust. When my colleagues, our colleagues sitting here in the auditorium, when we say that the Treasury needs to monitor, and when we come to the Treasury is our partner for the internal audit. Our colleagues go out to all the enterprises, to all the facilities and objects in Russia. We receive the report from the Treasury, and we understand the risks in the territories and specifically at the site. So the colleagues now provided me some information about the number of contracts and agreements that we generate in our primary documents, a huge number, and all these systems which are operators allow us to analyze the data, find the discrepancies, understand where we have the red signals, and how we can react to these signals. And I can say that our interaction with the Federal Treasury for the internal control, it is built, of course, on mutual trust and understanding of the process and continuous exchange of information. From us, we send the materials to the Treasury and receive their documents back, and it helps to enhance the control. How is the control organized in our agency? Sergei mentioned aircraft building. So speaking about the internal control in the structural departments, it's sort of an autopilot. All the standard procedures which are described in our documents in the control charts, and I'm going to speak about this separately. You know, the control charts, they caused hot discussions because suddenly everyone realized what he or she is responsible for. So when there is a violation, who is responsible? We take out the control card and we look at the names of the people who are responsible for this or that stage of the process. Of course, it is a very labor-consuming task, and we need to refresh and renew the cards all the time, but it is a must. What is the internal audit system? It's a continuous identification of the risks present and future, and sharing the information with the management. And I can say that as the results of the auditor usually provides two reports. One very detailed, usually the accounting office read it, and the second short report is provided to the authorities. So this short report includes the description of all the risks and the ways of avoiding those risks. So if the agency of authority can state what really is an obstacle to achieving our national goals, then the system of control will fulfill its main function, quality management. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to say that you can rest assured about the pyramid, because when we're talking about the civil engineers, when the top is destroyed, you know, the foundation is still preserved. You have a lot of pressure on you, but you are very stable. But yes, but you know, there are so many layers. It's a greenhouse effect. Now, I would like to ask Alexander Zhukov. St. Petersburg is one of the constituent subjects of the Russian Federation, and we've already shared your experience. You're one of the leading leading constituents as far as the government control is concerned. What is the system, how it is built, and what are the difficulties that you are facing as the constituent subject of the Russian Federation when organizing the internal control and audit? Do you have any system of exchanging the information with the audit chamber of St. Petersburg, for instance, with the federal control agencies? And how does this information help you in your work? Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak about the experience of St. Petersburg. Just a few words about the background. In 2014, the government said that the set up the committee, said that the goals are to streamline the expenditures, that's why we have 3 blocks now. We have the planning blocks, the sellings, the committee for finances, like our purse, and the financial control body, which helps to reasonably plan and spend the money. We started our activity in 2014, and when we split this process into 3 parts. The first one is estimation of the expenditures. Then the expenditures, that's second stage, are moved into the process when we start acquisitions. And the financial control, that's control of the implementation of the spendings. And here we faced the difficulties. The middle part didn't help to close this circle. We could see the planning and we could see the implementation. But the middle part, for instance, if the selling is 100 rubles, for instance, and then there may be a tender, and we received a contract for 100 rubles, but we couldn't influence this procedure in any way to make this amount even lower. So we have regulations for budget spendings, and we try to minimize the budget risks, and we proposed the following idea in 2015. This procedural control over acquisitions, we took it up ourselves, and that's why we have the comprehensive picture from point 0 to the results of implementation, and we have authority over every stage. The next one, we proceeded from the principle that the results of the control should be interesting right now at this current moment. So we implemented the practice of surveys, like, for instance, topical surveys, December contracts. This is a high-risk operation because a lot of agencies have money. They have to spend the annual allocations in December. The time frame is very, they are pressed to spend the money in December. And that's why it's a very fast operation, because if they don't spend the money, they need to return the money to the budget. But we need to make sure that all the subcontractors fulfill the contracts by the end of the year. Then there are large budgetary contracts with very big implications for the city, mostly government contracts, and we have to monitor them. And unfortunately, we also have to monitor the situation in the banking sector, because a lot of banks go bankrupt, and it means that the banking guarantees are no longer available. So working on analyzing the banking community also helped us to, for instance, identify the banks on the verge of bankruptcy. So we changed the guarantee and to other banks, and they were still valid. Also, staging. For instance, the audit needs to be helpful now. For instance, if we need to replace the pipes by the heating season, we need to do it before the heating season starts, not in the middle of the winter time. Also, in order to check how efficient the spendings are, we need to look not only at spending of the money as far as the payment documents are concerned, but also we need to check the compliance with the results that were indicated in the project. Again, going back to the regulations and to budgeting, what we put in the budget, that's what we are going to spend. But the efficiency of spending, it also means that we need to have some revenues when we identify the subsidies of the city to potential interested parties. We have a rule that only those can take part in the tenders for receiving subsidies who don't have any tax arrears. And that helped with the budget of St. Petersburg. Now, I want to also support Sergei, because we minimize the negative features, and we have the internal audit that we established in St. Petersburg. I can confess that it was not a very fast period. It took us about a year and a half. Before that, we had a lot of work on methodology, and since 2014, we teach to develop the matrix of risks. What are the large risks? What is the schematic of the financial control? So we wanted to share this information with the CEOs, with the heads of organizations, that it's not something new. This is something that is part of their functions and of their job responsibilities. So after this work, the mentality has changed. We have the charts of financial control, and people can see in these charts or cards who is responsible for which component. Of course, they used to know who is responsible for what, but now it is officially written in those cards, the personal responsibility of people for certain functions. Even when we identify the violations, we look at the compliance with the internal control, financial internal control cards. And if we see that the description of the card is not accurate, then we probably give an order to update the card so that the violations should not occur or should be minimized. And the cards of internal financial control allow us to identify the typical or systemic errors. This is something that we are striving to do, because of course everyone who is operating inevitably makes errors, but some errors are systemic, and we analyze the cards trying to prevent those systemic errors. What else is important for the internal financial control in the city? We need to incentivize the heads of the organizations so that they should be able to detect the violations and faults themselves, because everyone is afraid of failures or faults, but the small drawbacks that are identified, or the failures and faults that are identified during the internal audit, are not punishable. And in this way, the CEOs are interested in identifying these faults at the very start, because they are not going to be punished for that. Besides, when we have this system in operation, we also carried out the initiative and we about the compliance of the documents on some administrative offense. These are criteria of the financial management in St. Petersburg. We can have a rating, or we create competitive environment for the CEOs for the best internal audit and control system. So that's another incentive. Have I covered your question? Have I answered? Sharing the information with the audit chamber and admittance of evidence, we are still preparing for how this exchange of information should be arranged. But I think that all the constituent audit chambers are going to follow the dictate of the Federal Audit Chamber. So you don't have complete trust. No. Thank you very much, Alexander, for sharing your very interesting experience. We are really pressed for time, and we have finished with all the presentations. Now, the second part of our meeting, I know that there are several people who wanted to provide short comments. Just a couple of comments, 1 minute max, and a few questions. Dear colleagues,
distinguished colleagues, today we view such issues that are very important to all of us, the issues of duplicated functions and duties, as really a separate matter, which is unique for each and every subject of control. It is not only about blanket, it's about greenhouses. In any case, the organization of inner state or municipal control is a driver of public finance management. This goes without saying. And at regional level, they have to carry out not only unified budgetary policy for all municipal bodies, but also there should be unified policy on organization of municipal control. We cooperate with municipal authorities. However, personnel is an important asset here, and the problem is that there is absolute lack of qualified personnel, of qualified staff. Probably there are some specialists in some bigger cities, but as for minor towns, it is really a problem. So the issue of delegating duties and authorities from municipal to regional level is very acute. Sometimes the words that duties and authorities have been delegated stay just words, they are not implemented. Now we work on that, we work on improving the system of delegating duties, and here we were helped by methodological support of Federal Treasury. We received a general report and supervision. There are such guidelines for each and every region, which can be of great help. And people who are responsible for this work at the general level, their decisions make it possible for us to make some vital decisions. However, the thing is that this process has to be carefully checked and inspected later on, because we understand that we'll have to be responsible for it. However, I underscore that there is absolute lack of personnel, and despite of that, we should not rely on people who are not qualified for it, and I believe we all have to listen to what Federal Treasury recommends us to do. Thank you. Another comment, Elena Belikova, Head of Department for Control of Federal Treasury, to follow up on this discussion and to follow up on the conversation that we had yesterday. I'd like to talk about a minor segment of a bigger area of financial control, but this segment is very sensitive and important. Here we talk about checks and inspections, control operations, the three blankets that we wrap our clients in. What do we plan to improve here? There are many databases, many sources of information that allow us to have a look at all the risks and all the purchases that have been carried out and that can ultimately lead to certain violations. There is no need, and we have not been doing so for some time already, there is no need to carry out control non-stop and 100% control some well-trusted purchasers. Because sometimes it does not make sense to control the company that carries out purchases, but probably control only some separate purchases of those companies. Even on the basis of what we already have, we can predict what would be the results of their purchases. What can we do here? It is understandable that this should not be done manually. We know that there is private office in the system of a commissioner of a purchaser, private office of a controller, but if we have a look at this private office of a controller, this is only a place to post information. It does not let us get some additional information from other sources in order to carry out the activities. It does not give an opportunity to compare what's posted there with other purchases, with other stakeholders and actors. The situation should be different. A controller should have a full-fledged private office, a functional one, where the risks will be clearly seen on a daily basis, where the activity will be strictly planned, and later on, if those processes are automated, the system will have to prevent some risks because the actors will be warned against some possible prospective risks. What is important here, in this part, we have already quite a number of best practices, guidelines, textbooks, recommendations that can be used by all the bodies that have to do with purchasing control. And finally, the practices that we have and the private office that we are working now on, we're going to make it accessible for all the control bodies. And finally, what do we see here? What is the impediment from the point of view of regulation? And what do we need to do in order to boost this system of automated control? What we do now according to Article 95 can be done also according to Article 99. It's important to finalize this system and give an opportunity to compare these subjects for purchasing to compare terms of delivery with terms proposed for same goods just on the market. It's important to build information and to organize it structurally, systemically. Elena, we can organize a specific session for you because you are well beyond your time limit. Well, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to pay your attention to the digitalization of purchasing system. Yes, thank you. It is very important that the Treasury also deals with it, and yesterday it was said on multiple occasions, the problem that we have today is in these violations in defining the initial price of contract. This is the source of all the problems. How is this price defined? We tried to define the terms of building this price, but this is all rather controversial, so you will have to deal with it, and I ask you to pay specific attention to that. Colleagues, any questions to speakers? Yes, we have one. You have the floor. Valery Ivanov, Academy of Trade. I have a question for Madam Kadyrova. You were pictured in the triangle and pyramid that we have as the bottom of it, and you perform a number of duties or functions that you talked little about. Do you use the notions as artificial intelligence, neural networks? Do you use it? Because probably it would facilitate the whole process and many problems will be solved automatically if you use such technologies. Thank you. I actually wanted to dwell on it. We build a great bulk of data in the operational systems that we operate. There are several problems. It is time-consuming to define the indicators needed for this informational system. At whose expense do we do it? At the expense of our officers, who have to deal with allocation of budgetary funds. These are young people who day and night spend their time defining those indicators. If they make a single mistake with a single indicator, the money can go to a wrong address. And if we talk about a qualified system here, we need a system where indicator will be introduced once and used on multiple occasions later on by all the operators of this system. What we have now, we introduce one and the same indicator separately, each and every time. We do not have an opportunity to copy, to paste them, to reload them from one database to another. If we talk about the future of control and accountability, we have to solve this issue in order to increase the productivity of labor of those people who deal with those systems. It will make it possible for us to get down to analytical job, to compare the data, and the higher we move along this pyramid, the broader our outlook gets. The audit chamber views the situation at the macro level. We view it only at our local level. Federal Treasury views it at its local level. By all means, we have to use this data, and I believe we'll strive to achieve this goal altogether. I guess this is a question for a separate discussion, which we will by all means plan, probably we'll schedule it for this year. I believe that this is the direction which we have to take. Otherwise, we will fail to enter digital economy. Colleagues, any other questions? No questions. Everything clear, probably. Or you might have heard some information that you need to think about in order to pronounce your questions later on. So I will be wrapping our discussion up. I have several points to pronounce. I believe that during this discussion and before in St. Petersburg, during the council, we were talking about the fact that we need to improve the control environment. Transformations are required. What transformation is it going to be? Well, probably we will introduce some amendments to legislation, but don't be too anxious about it, because I believe this is not the most important thing for us, because the budgetary code is sacred scripture for us. We are very cautious about it. What I want to say is, if we negotiate the principles that we all share and that we all are guided by, if we agree to understand that financial control is a mechanism and that audit is a tool, and that audit can coordinate financial control, if we all agree what is the difference between founders' control and other forms of control, our life will be getting easier. I believe we can base our further decisions, our further work, the steps we will take, we can base them on the fact that we have to negotiate the issues of sharing the information between control authorities. What is the possible maximum level of transparency and openness? It is understandable that we cannot share all our results, 100% of them. We cannot publicize them all. It will be just a treasure for journalists, and apparently we cannot do it. But we have to think about it. The implementation of risk-oriented approach has proven to be positive, and we have walked further this way. Then, prevention of violations. An important story. What is the place of this system in our overall control environment? And what are the ways, the possible ways to develop this prevention practice? And what place is designed for innovation? The issue of digitalization and automatization. Not only should we analyze the information, the data that we have and that we have to trust, but finally, we have to understand that we do not have to go to each time to our control subjects. We shouldn't have to go to our control subjects each and every time, because I believe this is the sort of work that has already become a thing of the past. Our today's discussion has also proven that we require a unified platform, unified terminology that we will use, the language that we will be speaking. And the more often we meet, the more often we negotiate, the less regulations we will need and the less amendments to the budgetary code we will need. If we have our common norms and regulations, we will understand what tools we can implement and what actions we should take. So this all could take us to make another important step in our joint operation. May I say thank you to all of our panelists for their interesting and substantial speeches. Thank you to the audience that was so attentive. I believe this discussion will be continued. Thank you, colleagues.